I am joined by James Haeck. I have been working with James Haeck for a very long time at a variety of places, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Hello, James.
Hello, hello. Good to see you again.
It is very good.
I feel like it's been a whole pandemic since I've seen you.
It's been a minute. So, what have you been up to? First off, you've got a new job at Ghostfire Games. What have
Yes.
you been doing?
Yes. Since we last worked together, Todd, I've done a number of things. Uh, there's a project that I can't talk about.
Perfect.
There's
On par.
Tal'Dorei
Yeah, yeah.
campaign setting Reborn that I did with Critical Role in Darrington Press. Uh, that was just announced a couple of weeks ago and is set for release, I believe, tentatively sort of a TBA 2022 or early 2022 release. Uh, I'm thrilled as heck about that book in particular because it was originally a book that Matt Mercer and I wrote together. And so now, again, with Matt and with Hannah Rose, we updated that book. Originally, it was going to be a small update, but we just couldn't leave it. We had to make a definitive version, and we ended up doubling the page count. We ended up adding tons of new monsters, tons of new subclasses. The lore was all updated 20 years to be concurrent with Critical Role's Campaign 2. So a 20-year time jump. We added a bunch of factions. We added a whole bunch of new lore. Uh, it was a mammoth undertaking.
Well,
And
well,
and the art is gorgeous too.
what was it like returning to that and it kind of like resurfacing something that you had put so much of your heart and soul into?
It's an opportunity I don't think most people are lucky enough to get. So I felt really grateful for the opportunity to do so. Um, I I wrote my contributions to the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting when I was still in college, and I was right off of being an intern at Geek and Sundry, who loved D&D and was wanting to get into writing it. And that's where I met Mercer and the other Critical Role folks. And I, my knowledge of how to write D&D has improved exponentially since then.
I mean, you would hope so, right? You
Yeah,
always want to get better at what you're doing.
exactly.
You don't want to like downward slide.
Yeah, it's like I go back to that book and I look at it and I'm like, oh, good. I never improved since 2017.
I peaked in college.
No, so going back to it, there were a lot of portions. It was such a weird sort of like coin flip moment because either I would go back to a section and be like, damn, I wrote this. Or I'd go back to a section, it's like, oh, damn, I wrote this. Yeah, so sort of a roller coaster of being impressed with my past self and being absolutely mortified at my past self also.
Yeah, I look back at interviews and videos I've done in the past. I'm like, sometimes like, oh, I was really good. And then sometimes like, oh, no.
Yeah, but the great thing about this is that rather than being sort of permanently mortified at my past self, I was able to actually then go in and be like, all right, I've learned a lot since then,
Yeah.
whether it's about how to write fiction or how to write D&D. And I'm like, okay, well, let's fix it. Let's change it all around. Let's make it good this time. Let's take the good parts and make them great. And let's take the parts that I think are rough now, because I think I'm my own worst critic, and make them something I can be proud of here today in 2021.
Very true. Very true. What do you like about that universe?
Oh man, there's so much. I love how good a launch pad for D&D players Tal'Dorei is, right? Because Tal'Dorei was invented by Matt to introduce his friends at Liam's birthday party to
Mm-hmm.
D&D in general. And so it has this great combination of very sort of like classic tropes that are then kind of twisted and played to a more modern understanding of what fantasy can be, which makes it just a great entry point. I think it's even better than the Forgotten Realms as an entry point because it's not bagged down, but bogged down by a lot of baggage. Uh, it's uh, it's so versatile too. all of the different continents of Tal'Dorei. And so far, of Exandria, all the different continents of Exandria, Tal'Dorei, Wildmount, Marquette, Isilra, they all have such a unique and interesting flavor to them that whether you're playing your entire campaign set on one of them, like campaign 2 basically worked, or if your campaign takes place across all of them, like campaign 1 did, there's always something new to see, and it all feels very real and fleshed out and detailed.
What have you learned in your experience of like doing all these D&D games and creating all these different D&D books and source material? What do you think is key to making a storyline that is engaging for people, or a source book that is engaging? Because it has to be, as Chris Perkins has kind of mentioned, you kind of have to do multiple things. You have to make it fun to read. You have to make it fun to read for a dungeon master to actually use, and it has to be functional all at the same time. You're kind of having to serve 3 different masters when you're writing any kind of book. What have you learned about adventure writing?
That's a really good point to bring up regarding what Chris said, because I look at my shelf of D&D books. I have every 5e book. Some of them because some of them from when I was just an obsessive fan, and some of them from when I started working on them. And I can pretty safely say that of the adventures, I've run maybe 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, but not all the way to completion. And the rest I have read kind of like I'm paging through a magazine. And I'm sure that people produce adventures with the understanding that not everyone is going to play them. In fact, not just not everyone, a tiny fraction of people who actually buy them are going to play them, because a lot of the fun of D&D is perhaps counterintuitively not in the playing of it. There's a lot of fun to be found in D&D in talking about it and reading it and doing all the sort of things that sort of spark your imagination, become just shy of lighting all of the necessary tinder for a campaign. Scheduling, having a group, having a consistent schedule, all of that stuff. It needs to come together in a perfect storm. And if all that's not there, well, then you still got books to read, and you still got people to talk about with. Okay, so that all that said, I like to think that the best thing a source book, a campaign setting, or an adventure can do is it can spark imagination. And that has to be true for a good adventure or for a good source book. It has to spark the imagination, one, of the game master first, because typically, if you're looking at a campaign setting or an adventure, the game master is the one who kind of pitches the concept to their group of players. And so if it doesn't spark the GM's imagination, it's a non-starter. And so you got to do that first. And that often happens by having storylines and NPCs and villains and allies that are flavorful and interesting, that have a sense of relatability to your own life to them. There's a lot of different ways to spark someone's imagination, and they're different for everyone, which means, to me, as a writer, the only way I can be assured that something will spark someone's imagination is I have to write things that interest me, because I know that if they interest me, they interest someone, and I have to trust that I'm not just a complete weirdo who likes things that no one else likes, right? I have to trust that someone else out there is interested in the same things I am, and it seems so far that that there's a grain of truth to that. And so by doing that, and then that sort of passion, if you're reading something that someone has written passionately, you can kind of tell, you can sense the enjoyment in the text.
Absolutely.
And so once you've got the GM on board with you, then they need to be able to sell the game to the players, basically. they get their group together and they say, hey, here's the cool things about this adventure, about this campaign setting. You want to play a D&D game with me? And it's then the writer's job to make sure that the things that are cool about the adventure or campaign setting are made very clear. Um, uh, a good and excited game master can basically pick out what they like and eloquently deliver it on their own. But not everyone is so introspective to know exactly why they like something and exactly why something's cool. They might get an idea of it just from reading the text, but it can be hard to express in words. Something Kobold Press's Midgard campaign setting does that I really, really like is one of its first pages. It says, here are 8 very important things about Midgard. And if you like these things, you'll like the campaign setting. So here are these 8 things that we think are really super cool. Bump, 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 bump. And then it's like, oh, great. As the DM reads the book, they'll always be thinking back to these 8 cool things. And then if they decide they want to run the campaign for their players, they'll be like, all right, which of these 8 cool things will ignite and inspire my gaming group? And then there you go. There you've got a D&D campaign right there.
Yeah, there seems to be like multiple points of inspiration, like you said. Like I'll read any adventure book, and I'll often steal. I've certainly taken a lot of things from, especially the most recent adventures, seem even more accessible in 5th edition D&D coming out of Wizards, in like Icewind Dale and stuff like that. There are these nice little moments. I'm like, oh, I could put that just about anywhere, and I kind of appreciate that. But I am also noticing with the latest video games, and obviously I work at a video game company for Idle Champions, for which the channel we are on. But there's weird inspiration to be found when you see like a spell effect actually represented in something like Idle Champions or some other game where you hear or you see an actual goblin running around. You're like, oh, wow, it kind of helps my imagination, or it's a point of inspiration in a way that I wasn't thinking about. That also comes from like watching live play shows, and like it's nice that D&D now has like there's a lot of ways to be inspired by D&D. It is, but you're totally right about so much time. Like I spent most of my time reading the monster manual, and I spent probably most of my time thinking about player characters I will never play.
Yeah. Yes. I remember when the 5th edition monster manual was brand new, and I begged my friends who had a car, I was in California at the time, to take me to the nearest thing that resembled the game store and get that monster manual. And I think I had a play rehearsal that night. And so I grabbed the book and I just like flopped down in the green room and tore through it. And I just sort of grudgingly got out and went out on stage whenever I needed to. Like I was being torn from my mother's arms.
Right, yeah.
No, the book. The wee bab needs this book.
The monster manual in particular is quite famous for getting people very into D&D because it's very accessible. You have all this amazing art, and every monster is a potential adventure, right? Like it's a nice hook point for an adventure in that way.
You know, you mentioned something about stealing for campaigns, and one of the things that Matt and I were adamant about in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting, I think this is one of our better ideas that we've ever had in our lives, was to include little plot hooks in every area. Every area in the Gazetteer of Tal'Dorei, we would put a little 1 or 2 paragraph story seed that was, to varying levels of detail. We really wanted the GM to be able to put their own ideas into these plot hooks. And that idea was so successfully received, so well received, that we just decided to, in Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, well, we've got to do the same thing. And then in Tal'Dorei Campaign Setting Reborn, we're like, all right, well, how many more of these can we shove into this thing?
Right.
And the answer was quite a great deal more. And those little plot seeds are so easy to just like look at and feel that it's like a little fire starter of inspiration. You look at that and you're like, oh, and then it fires off into another neuron from like a show you saw, and then it fires onto something else from an experience you had in another D&D game. Now you've got a plot going on in your head, and you can set that in Tal'Dorei, or you can take it back to your home campaign setting or anything like that. But it's just a little package of inspiration that'll catch on fire for you.
I am this year more than ever, I get questions, especially from people who are kind of coming of age and just learning about D&D, and they wonder, like, what do I need to start doing now to get into D&D, or to like start writing for D&D? And my advice is, well, number one, I'm not a very good writer, but do it now. Like, keep doing the work. What's your advice to anyone who sees your career, you coming out of college and already like kind of hitting the ground running, working extremely hard? What's your advice for people who want to write for D&D, who want to design for D&D?
Man, scary thing now is I'm not even the youngest person doing this anymore.
No, I know.
My pal Mackenzie, who is like 4 years younger than me, is working at Wizards as their junior game designer.
Yeah, you and I both worked with Mac.
That's awesome. I mean, she's incredible.
On. Yeah,
she saved my bacon on a recent project I was doing. I would be dead in the water if not for her. So based on the
she has repaired many an idea of mine. So
based on the 2 data points I have of me and Mackenzie, my first point of advice is go to Chapman University, because no, a weird coincidence.
Yeah, right.
Where you go to school hardly matters is my actual first point of advice. Where you get your education is close to irrelevant. My sort of good fortune when it comes to where I went to school was I went to a school that had a really solid liberal arts program, and that exposed me to a lot of ideas and things about the world and literature and history and geography and art that I had never ever considered before, even though I was going specifically for like theater performance, which is a major I discarded along the way. All of these things teach you to be a better and more well-rounded human being, and that just makes you a better writer. The more things you do, the more things you learn, the more experiences in your life you have to draw from, the better your writing will be. And seek out opportunities constantly. This isn't so much about being a better writer as much as it is about being a hireable writer, which are 2 very different things. I've seen a lot of bad writers get hired, and I've seen a lot of good writers never get hired. But if you want to, if you want to make money writing, you have to be hired. So do your best to be both. Like my journey through D&D would have been very, very different if I hadn't interned at Geek and Sundry, if I hadn't met Matt Mercer and the Critical Role people, and if I had not been living in Southern California at the time, that opportunity would never have presented itself to me. So I think if you are interested in writing D&D, you don't have to be in LA, you don't have to be in Seattle, but find a hub of creative people. And that doesn't even have to be a physical hub. That can be a digital hub. You can be online with a bunch of creative people too. But however you find it, whether in the internet or in a city like Seattle or in your local coffee bar, or whatever, COVID makes this all very weird to talk about. No matter where it is, find a community, become active in it, and like lose your fear of sharing things with others. I used to be very, very protective of what I wrote.
Are you playing with dice? I have to call you out. Are you playing with dice right now?
Yes, I am.
You better stop.
All right.
I hear dice rolls.
Get them out of here.
I do it too.
Get them out of my hands.
Yeah, I constantly have to tell myself, stop. It's a disease we all have.
What was I saying before I started fidgeting? Find your people.
Yeah.
Find your
Find your
community.
people, and not be afraid of sharing your ideas.
Yes, don't be afraid of sharing your ideas with other people. Find groups of people you can trust and you can share your ideas with, because it serves a twofold purpose. One is, who knows, one of those people might give you a job someday. That was me with my pal and now incredibly prolific MCDM and Wizards of the Coast author James Introcaso. He's awesome, and
Fantastic.
I sort of stumbled into giving him his first job back in 2015 in RPGs, and he has since then given me many jobs writing cool stuff. And beyond that, finding a community of people who will authentically and with great interest read, critique, and share your work will help you become a better writer. It can be hard to muster the courage and the vulnerability to allow yourself to be critiqued. I think getting graded on essays in schools perhaps has terrified us all into never wanting to share our writing. But if you can find people who you trust to give you good faith feedback, to give you thoughtful feedback, give you feedback that will actually improve you rather than just sort of waffling, then you know you found someone good. I say this with this sort of growing sense of dread that more than a week ago, Todd, you gave me some writing of yours to look at. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should actually read and give my honest, thoughtful feedback.
Oh, don't worry. I share your dread. Just in a different way.
Yeah.
It's always tough when a medium is not your own, and it is interesting. Like I've learned to accept that certain people's brains function in a very different way. I think you are very much exposed to this. Is that my mind is good at certain things, and I am not good. Like I will never be functionally very good at grammar or as written. Something about my mind doesn't understand it, and I don't know what the word is for that. But like even misspelling and stuff, I have a terrible time. But everyone can come up with an idea. It's kind of the follow through that really matters. And I feel like I have good ideas, but again, you and I worked on a project together. I designed some subclasses and then Mac fixed them and made them made them perfect, because as Mac does, because Mac, like, not only does Mackenzie DeArmas, who we're talking about, has work incredibly hard, just gets subclass design. And it is a fact that you have to deal with. Like if you want to be good at something, it doesn't hurt to have an innate talent, but don't be afraid of having to work really hard anyways. Because I know people who don't have like a natural talent and have just worked harder than everyone else at it.
Yeah, exactly. Hard work can overcome just about any boundary. It might have to be really hard work, but if there's something that you're passionate about, then you might as well go for it.
Yeah. It's good life advice.
Yes.
But why do you enjoy this? Have you been dungeon mastering, Stowe?
I have been. In the pandemic, I started a campaign, and I recently joined a campaign with my cousins that I'm not DMing, which is awesome. Huge, great change of pace for me.
So is the Dungeon Master's Lament, like, when I want to play.
But no, I've been DMing throughout the pandemic over the internet. Actually, the people who I'm playing with are going to come up this weekend for the Washington Renaissance Fair. And so we're going to have our first in-person game in many months this very same weekend. I'm super excited about it. I don't know when this is going to go live, so it's probably no longer this weekend I'm talking about, but you know, there is something really magical about playing in person that I don't think many of us acknowledged. I think a lot of us took it for granted back when we could just sort of play in person with our friends all the time. And now that we're forced to play online and deal with the challenges, the unique challenges that playing online provides, people are
Yeah.
starting to get it.
Yeah, I was just having that conversation of like there is a chemistry in the room, and I come from a theater background, so everything was about role playing and less about like min maxing to like maximum effect. In fact, I find in my old age that I don't like multi-classing particularly, and I don't care if that subclass is optimal necessarily either. Like I still love the assassin. I will love the assassin forever because I like the concept of an assassin, but like that theater performance of someone's next to you, you're rolling dice, you got your character sheets, and there is an energy in a room. It's theater, and it's hard to replace. And film is not unlike the same thing. Like often the actors will be in the same scene together, and sometimes they're not. But getting that energy from somebody else who's in the room is hard to replace. And all the video services that bring us together and allow us to get through the pandemic are fantastic. But yeah, something's always going to get lost a little bit, when you're not in a room just having a good time.
I'm not sure if people think about this. People who aren't me think about this, but like when you're acting, maybe you can relate to this, Todd. There is like an energy that people give off. It feels so new wave to say this, but it's like when you are around people, that emotional energy, like you can practically feel it. And you can get it a little bit through the internet, through video and through audio, but there's something almost like there's something almost metaphysical about being in physical proximity with someone, and you can just feel their energy while you're playing with them.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who like largely when they communicate, like I absorb everyone's like little micro expressions, their body language and everything else, which is also why I will avert my eyes sometimes because it's too much sensory input for me. This is also why I interview people, because this is the thing I love the most. And I found that during COVID, this was the hardest thing for me to deal with, was I was no longer interviewing people in person. And that is very hard for me because I am an introvert, but I love interviewing.
Shift.
Yeah, and even doing these interviews like we are right now, via Zoom and stuff, is something my brain doesn't quite connect in necessarily a regular way. And so when the bulk of your social interaction is based off interviewing people, because my best friend is my wife Megan Kenreck, and I didn't realize how much of like other social interaction I was legit getting by interviewing people in person, and that was enough for me. But yeah, once the pandemic happened, yeah, there is something about being in a room and having a back and forth, and having a conversation that is just different. People react differently, they light up differently. It's, I think, a very instinctual thing, but yeah, there's always going to be something about that D&D table and that energy. And if you can capture that on Zoom, that's fantastic, or any video service. That's fun as well. So yeah. It's one of the weird things I honestly like about ILO Champions is like I can shove people I legit know into it that I'm friends with. And there's a little bit of guilt associated with that too. Like if I leave someone out, I'm like, oh, well, like if
why can't I fit all my friends into my team?
Yeah, like if I don't have Evelyn in there, right? Like I feel bad. like it's kind of a strange thing that happens with D&D. Do you have any new dungeon mastering advice for people who are scared of it, and maybe advice for dungeon masters who are like, maybe they need a break and start playing?
Oh man, you asked me to write dungeon mastering advice for 3 years, and now you ask me a question like this?
Yeah, it's terrible. You should be ready for it, but I'm sneaky.
Dungeon mastering advice in the age of COVID. The thing that comes to me when I think about DMing. Can you hear the dog that's going on?
I can't hear that. I can't hear a dog.
Well,
and I know you're touching your dice again.
All right, let's start that whole thing over.
No, we're live. We're doing it.
So, all right, dogs and dice aside, Um, my best DMing advice for people who are stuck behind a computer screen, who have to interact with their friends kind of through this digital medium all the time, is to talk less. Follow the advice of Leslie Odom Jr. as Aaron Burr, talk less. Because one, I think the DM talks too much anyway.
I agree.
I know I talk too much when I DM. I feel incredibly self-conscious when I talk all the time. Sometimes you just got a monologue, though. Sometimes you just got a monologue, but especially over video call, where internet connections and lag and this sort of general sort of sense of trepidation of talking that we have because of all those things over Zoom can make it very challenging for your players to express themselves fully because you're talking all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you just sit back, this is something I'm very uncomfortable about, but working through as a DM. If you just sit back and let silence go on for 5, maybe 10 seconds, one, it will feel like an eternity to you. But two, you will give your players the opportunity to say things that you might otherwise not expect them to say. It will give them the chance to not just say the first thing that pops up into their head, or to say to just respond to whatever it is you're saying, but you'll get independent thoughts. You'll get unprovoked role playing. You'll get all the sort of things that they themselves are interested in doing, rather than just sort of like reacting to the bait that you hang out in front of them. All pandemic, I was kind of wondering, why is it that my players are kind of just sort of going along with the plot? I got really worried because I was like, I love when my players do their own thing. I love when I can set up a world, just kind of expect the people to live in it for a little while. And for some of this campaign that I'm running right now, there was a great deal of let's do what's in front of us. And I know that these players are not those type of players. I know they have a great deal of imagination because I've seen their character backstories. I've seen their sort of out of game text RPs, right? They're very into their characters, and they're very into the world, and they love all that stuff. So why are they just kind of doing what's right in front of them the whole time? And I came to realize it's because I never let them get a word in edgewise. I was so nervous about letting the energy drop, because just like we were talking about the sort of energy of the room is so much higher in person that I felt like I really had to shepherd things when we were playing digitally. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes you just have to accept that the energy is going to be a little bit lower over video call, and live in those moments where the entire table falls silent and everyone is thinking not about how do I respond to what the DM just said, but how would my character act? What do I want to do in this moment?
Do you ever have difficulty with famous characters in D&D? I recently experienced something. I have been a long-term fan of Ravenloft and Strahd. I have a painting of Strahd up in my house because it's the level of the whole room behind me is called the Ravenloft. But I recently ran Strahd, and I found myself for the billionth time not really role-playing Strahd as the dungeon master, because he is an irredeemable monster. There's no good in him, and the group was getting ready to plan for how they were going to attack the castle, and I just had him ride out to them, which caused massive panic, and I didn't really roleplay him. I just had him attack them. And I wonder why I do that. I did that psychologically because I kind of feel like everyone has an opinion on who Strahd is and how he acts, and I wonder if they fill it in as a player to a degree, rather than me doing some kind of vague Eastern European accent, or upon, you going on a monologue as Strahd. I'm like, I kind of feel like at some point Strahd's over it, and it's just like, let's kill this next group of adventurers, right?
There's a thing in horror movies. Excuse me. There's a thing in horror movies where they say that you can be scarier by not showing the monster.
Yeah.
You can use the audience's imagination to build up tension and suspense by withholding showing the monster until the very last possible moment. And I think there's something to be said for famous characters, for named lore characters in D&D that is there. I think it's really interesting what you said about letting their imaginations do the work, because it's true. With a character like Strahd, everyone has their own interpretation of him. Some people might interpret him as a sort of classic, charming vampire. Others, you and I, might interpret him as this sort of analog for abuse. And there's so many different facets to characters like this. There's so many different books and video games and board games and role-playing games that everyone has developed their own idea. And sometimes it can be best just to like let the legend speak for itself and only have the character appear when all else fails, when all else seems lost, when there's no other choice but to deploy them and have Strahd ride out onto the field of battle. I think about Vox Machina a lot. I thought about them a lot in the creation of Tal'Dorei Reborn. Doubly so because we gave stat blocks for Vox Machina in that book for them 20 years after they defeat the Whispered One and bring peace to Tal'Dorei. They have their own lives. They're not adventuring anymore. They're going on more trips to the Tal'Dorei Council or to Whitestone than they are out to slay dragons and so forth. And I get to thinking about how lore characters like that can become an overwhelming presence in a campaign, where they're sort of the long shadow of their legend means that the characters, the player characters, can never get out of the shadow of these former heroes once those heroes have been introduced. If you never introduce them, then it's a non-issue. No character, no shadow. But once you do introduce their name, even if you just mention their name, right? Even if you just say, oh yeah, and Vexalia often goes to the Tal'Dorei Council along this street, suddenly people are thinking, well, wait a second. Why are we going out and going on this adventure if we know that this famous great ranger and her powerful animal companion are also able to, they're alive, they're here, they can do this adventure. Why the hell are we doing this? Why are we saving the world? Vox Machina exists. And the answer to that is, from a very sort of functional point of view, well, it's because it's your story. And the DM has to remember that it's a player character's story. And this is different from Strahd, because Strahd's a villain, he's an antagonist. Mm-hmm. He can be in the story no matter what. He can be something for the players to fight against. But when it comes to people like Vox Machina, or say Drizzt in the Forgotten Realms, or anything like that, it's of paramount importance that the DM remember that even introducing characters like this as a cameo can runs the risk of overshadowing player accomplishments. This is a kind of funky example, but there's a mission in the Lord of the Rings Online MMO where the player characters get in over their heads in the Old Forest, and Tom Bombadil comes and saves them.
Mm.
And Tom Bombadil is such a divisive character the best of times. but to have your characters be saved from otherwise certain death by hey do dilly do is like, oh man, I thought we were telling a great story with us here. So it's a very tight balancing act, I think, with these powerful lore characters. How do you keep them invested for that sort of good feeling, nostalgic, oh, I know that character, I know Percy, I know that he's got his rifle corps training over in Whitestone, this is a story that I know, and I'm excited to sort of like bring my knowledge back. It's a neuron firing happy moment. How do you get that but avoid overshadowing the player characters? It's doable. It's doable. But it is a challenge.
Excellent advice. What we are running out of time. I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but what is it that keeps you coming back to making D&D and D&D supplements? Like, how are you always coming back to this? What is the opportunity that makes you increasingly happy to do this?
It's people. It's seeing people who enjoy the things I work on, who enjoy the things I write, but more importantly, who create their own things based on what I create. Whenever I see someone creating a little diorama of Troll Skull Manor from Waterdeep Dragon Heist, I'm like, oh my God, that is something that I've made that has touched the life of someone else enough for them to go to the effort of creating something beautiful for them and for their player characters. It is going on to, say, the Ghostfire Gaming Discord server, which I intend to do once my secret projects with them come out into the world, and seeing records of play and seeing people saying, this is what happened to my characters in this session. This is the story that they told. And seeing the places where that lines up with the intentional sort of like powder kegs that I have placed all throughout the story, and seeing where they've dodged them and where the DM has had to create new conflicts of their own, and just see how it all has spun off into a unique story, something unique to the people who are playing it. That's what keeps me coming back.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, James Haeck, for being on the show. I appreciate it. It was good to come up with an excuse to hang out.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh my God, I missed you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. I missed you too.
See ya.
Bye.